Hi, and welcome to this introductory webinar on getting started with Wix Studio. I'm Aaron from the Wix Studio team. We've built this webinar with the focus of helping you better understand the basics of the platform. In this walkthrough, our product expert, Sebi, will take you through the steps to create a live website. First, we'll start off with an overview of the Wix Studio editor, and then we'll take a look at how to structure your site. We'll cover out-of-the-box responsive behaviors in the editor. Then, we'll show you how to make sure your design looks good on each breakpoint. Also, we'll go over the best way to use the layouting tools, animations, and effects. The design we'll create is based on a live site. So if you want to refer back to it as we go along and see the end results of each step, you can find it at katemanolu.com. Remember, this webinar is just the tip of the iceberg in the world of Wix Studio. So if you're looking to dive deeper into the capabilities of the platform, then make sure to check out our educational hub, Wix Studio Academy, to find how-to guides, webinars, and a full-length essential course, plus a ton of other great content. Also, make sure to join our forum to find answers, get product updates, and create potential collabs. You can share your code and design inspiration, plus see all the cool stuff made by the community. So sign up and come say hi over at forum.wixstudio.com. Okay, and with all that out of the way, let's get started. So enough from me. Sebi, let's hand this over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Aaron. Hi, everyone. I'm Sebi from the Academy team. Now, it's really a pleasure to be able to teach you guys about the new Wix Studio. And today, as Aaron said, we're actually going to be building a website from scratch. You can actually already visit the website to see it for yourself by going to katemanolu.com. So with this out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the website we're going to be building. So here's our website called Kate Manolu. Now in this website, we're building this website fully responsive to work from desktop to tablet to mobile. You can see here when I resize my screen, everything is scaling down. Now, if you're new to responsive design, it's important to understand that there's different responsive behaviors. We have sometimes where things scale, sometimes where things may be in a grid and can scale as well. Maybe you also will find that things fit the height of the screen almost so perfectly. If we resize the screen, you can see how the height of this component will also change. So it's really important to remember that there's different responsive behaviors. Let's take a look at another responsive behavior. When we continue scaling down between desktop all the way down to tablet, we can see that there's a change in the layout. This is what we call a breakpoint. A breakpoint is basically a point where the design will change. In theory, a breakpoint actually represents a range of screen sizes. In essence, if you look at this is a range of screen sizes that represents the desktop, and we set up a design for it to work for all these different desktops. So we don't really need to design on each individual screen size. We're actually designing for desktop screen ranges, and we're setting up the layout, the design for this here. Now, in Wix Studio, we really made things a lot easier to set up in terms of responsive design. So we're going to see how we're going to build a quick and easy responsive design that actually looks really professional. So let's go ahead and go into Wix Studio. So many of you are pretty brand new to this platform. So let's go ahead and do a short little overview of the platform to understand what it has, and also talk a little bit about responsive design. So first things first, about Wix Studio, the canvas is a pretty clean area. We want you to really take advantage of the drag and drop experience that we bring to responsive design. So you can really work with the canvas, drag and drop. You can actually resize the canvas as well to preview the design and see how things resize. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly add a text box here. And we're going to see how it behaves as we resize. You can see how the text resizes and behaves, as the screen size changes. Now, this is a very important thing to understand about Wix Studio, is that a lot of the components actually come out of the box responsive. So you don't really need to do any sort of setting up in order to make it responsive, to make it work for different layouts. And we have a lot of different tools to support different layouts. So in the top of the editor, of the workspace, we can see that we have these different icons. These icons represent what we call the breakpoint. We have a desktop here, we have a tablet here, and we have a mobile. Now, as I mentioned the breakpoints earlier, it actually represents a specific range of screen sizes. So you can see here on tablet, we say from 1,000 pixels and below, the width of the device will display this specific design that you're setting up here. And we'll talk about why it's important to understand the actual, setting up the design and why it's important to have a different design on desktop and mobile and tablet. But it's a very simple thing to set up. Now, to the right here, we have a very important value for Wix Studio. This value, 1,280 pixels, represents our editing size for a desktop. I don't know if you've noticed, but when I resize my screen here, or my canvas, you can see that it pops back into a size. And it pops back to this specific size. I can always modify this value and change what size I'm going to be editing at. But by default, you're going to be using 1,280. Now, what is this value? What is the importance of this value? This value in general really will determine some responsive properties of the site. It will really help us out. So we'll see as we're building the site, we'll see how it really becomes important for our design. Great. On the left-hand side, we have what we call the add panel. If you're used to Wix, you probably have seen this before. We have this new option here for quick add to help you quickly add default components to your page. We have all the different components you would expect on a website. Now, a very important part of the add panel is what we call sections. You can see we have a lot of different sections, different content, different types of sections, different designs. All these designs were built by in-house studio team. Our in-house studio team looked at modern designs and rebuilt them from scratch using Wix Studio. Now, the cool thing about these designs is you can see here as I add it to the page is that number one, of course, they're fully responsive. They work really well. You can see here our tablet design. You can see our mobile design. But number two, you can actually click on each individual element. And on the right-hand side, we have what we call the inspector panel. And you can really understand how it's built. Throughout the course of the webinar, we're actually going to go into each detail of the inspector panel to really understand how to build a responsive design. So this really, for you, if you're starting off, I really recommend to start off by adding some sections to the page, see how they're built, get some ideas about how to build the designs that you want. Great. Of course, we have all the different business solutions, blogs, stores, bookings, events. You can add a members area, multilingual. We also have an entry point to our CMS or content manager for those of you that are familiar with it. And there's a lot more apps in the app market that you can look at here. Now, responsive design, it's important to understand that components have some sort of relationship. Remember, we're designing for one specific size of screen that will support a lot of different screens. So in this case, we do need sometimes to add some logic. Now, in Wix Studio, we really removed the need for so much math and logic. So we're going to see how to build without needing to think about the logic. But what is the logic here? Inside of the layers panel, we can see the relationship between elements. We have the section, which is a parent, and then we have a child inside, which is the text. Between them, they can influence each other's size, maybe position sometimes. So it's really important to really understand what is the relationship of each element when you're editing in some specific designs, right? We don't need to be aware about the structure in general, but it's also important to keep this in mind. Moving on, we have a very cool tool called the global sections. Global sections allows you to create reusable sections, whether it's a header, a footer, or even a section sometimes. You can right-click on any section, select Set as Global, and you get the options that you need. So you can set this section as a global section, and it will be saved to our panel here that you can reuse it across multiple pages. These sections in general are synced between multiple pages. Right now, we have a default header. I can go ahead and add a new header here by clicking Add to Page to this new header. It will add it right below our other header, and we can just right-click on this other header and select Remove from Page. Now, we have our new header in place, and we can continue editing from there on. Then we have our site styles. Site styles represents, the style of your fonts and your colors. So you can set it up here. I've already done it beforehand for this specific design because I wanted to save the time, but you can find it here if you need to. Moving on, we're going to go here. We have our CMS, and then you can also find our code. We have the dev mode enabled for Wix Studio, so you can still add all the code that you need. Connect your APIs, create any simple logic to very advanced native apps if you need to. Great. So let's go ahead and start building our site. Now we already have our text box here. I'm going to resize it just a bit. You're going to see something about Wix Studio that makes it very simple to edit. The fact that this text in particular, as I resize the box, the text will resize with it. So I don't need to be doing math of trying to figure out what is the font size I want to use. And not only that, but the text is also, remember, it's scaling down, it's responsive. So let's go ahead and add, we're going to call this Kate Manilu. Okay. Let's put it like that. And actually, I think the font is not the correct one. So let's put our correct font. There we go. Now we have Kate Manilu there. And we're just going to resize it just a bit. Let's try to get it to the size that we'd like. Great. And then there we go. Now, something important about what's happening here. On the right-hand side in the inspector, we can see we have our size and we have our responsive behavior. Responsive behavior is basically a preset of a responsive behavior that you may want for this component. We've built presets for many components that you can reuse, and it's depending on the component on what you will see. But for example, here on text, we have scale proportionally. We also have other options. We have the option of wrap. So you would have guessed it. If we set it to wrap, it will wrap. You also will see that you also have the option of fixed. If we set it to fixed, it's always going to be the same size. We can switch between the different responsive behaviors to really get a feel of what we're building here. You can also set it to hug, and you'll see, take a look at that bounding box here. It will hug the box. And what does this mean? When I add more text, you will see that it will continue to hug it, right? This is the idea of hug it. It always fits the text inside the box. Scale proportionally here is what we're going to be using. Now, as far as what is the font size for this text right now, you can see here on the right-hand side that we have an option here that says font size. It says 125 pixels with a little asterisk. Now, you're probably familiar with pixels, but because we're building responsive design, we need to sort of use units that are responsive, right? Because pixels is fixed. So what we actually do here is we're actually creating a responsive behavior, and we're creating a little bit of logic in the back end, so that way you don't need to do the math. The font size here, 125 pixels with the asterisk, whenever you see the asterisk and the pixels, it actually means that you're taking a proportion of the editing size. So in here, we have an editing size of 1,280 pixels. So we will be able to see that the font size is in proportion to this editing pixels. Now, we talked about the size on top. We have the same idea here. Our width for this text is 641 pixels with the asterisk. What if I was to change it to 1280? Let's go ahead and change it to 1280. We will see that it will fit exactly the width of the screen. Why does this happen? Well, our editing size is 1280. So our width with the asterisk, whenever we see the pixel with the asterisk, it's in proportion to the editing size. So this is why it's very important to remember that editing size really is a really important part of building the site. I really recommend that, if you're going to start off and you want to change the editing size at some point, you can always change it later on, because you can see here the width here says 641. If I change my editing size, let's just say to 1001, you'll see that the width will change again, because it will automatically calculate for us what's happening. Now, for those of you that may be a bit familiar with responsive design, in the backend, we actually have advanced sizing for the components. Apart from these options here, you can always click on advanced sizing here, and you can actually see the real values of what we're setting up. For the width of this component, it's set up at 50%, and the font size is here that we saw before. We can always switch between advanced sizing and the simple sizing here with the responsive behaviors. And each responsive behavior will have a different unit that we're using. So we're making it very simple to really set up the, to take away the math and the logic of having to create a responsive design and just focus on building the responsive behavior that you want, and with using simple units here. Now the X and Y actually represents the distance away from the top left of the parent. And again, because they have the asterisk, it's in relation to the editing size as well. Something very important here that you see these blue dotted lines. You don't need to focus so much on this right now because we're building a scaling proportional design. But if we scroll down just a bit here on the inspector, we can find where we have our position. In position, we have our top margin and left margin. For those of you that are aware about margins, it's basically spacing, right? We're adding blank space outside of the component that kind of pushes the component into place. Now, in this case, we don't really need to be so aware about the margins for the docking, because scale proportioning will automatically make things, scale, and we don't need to be worried about what type of unit we're using and all these other things. So it's important to keep this in mind, that you can see here that we have a percent here, 9%, 12%. And if we were to switch to fixed, right, when we switch to fixed, we might want to also change the unit later, but it's okay. For those of you that aren't aware about percent, just as a means of for knowledge, percent actually takes a percent of the parent container and applies that as the value. So you can kind of get the idea here why the layers and the structure of the site and the parents with the child relationship, it can be important sometimes in responsive design. Now, we're not going to worry about any of this in this specific section because we're going to scale everything proportionally. So let's go ahead and start adding our second text. We're going to just copy paste here. And actually, I have my text here in my clipboard. I'm going to just copy paste the text. Okay, let's just do a paste. There we go. Great. Now, of course, my text is very large right now. We're going to just play around with this on the actual canvas. Again, we're not doing any math. We're just playing around with this text on the canvas. Very nice and simple. It's just going to resize for us. There we go. Great. And then we'll just do this so it's on a single line. A little trick I like to do, because sometimes you can see how the width of the container can be a bit larger than the actual text. So you can always just set it to hug. It will hug it and then switch it back to scale proportioning. It's a little bit of a hack I have to make things a little bit easier to work with. Now we can see that we also have, this text is a bit, the box is a bit above it. I think this is because of our spacing, so it's put spacing of 1. Now it's easier to work with. We'll just put it right there, right? We're not, again, positioning, sizing, and all these things. We're not worried about it right now, putting the specific values. So let's go ahead and add our media. We're going to add a small video here. Okay, we're just going to drag and drop it into here. And then we actually want this to overlay on the next section. So we're going to right click on top and select bring to front for this section. So that way it's on the top. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing for this video. All right, so now we have it here. Let's just drag it all the way up. There we go. And we can obviously play around with the size. Again, it's also scaling proportionally. It's very important to check out what it looks like as you're scaling proportionally to see if this is the right size. Now you can see that this is, maybe we need to give it a bit more space so that way it doesn't wrap around. Because when it's scaling proportionally, you can still get to the point where it's wrapping around a bit. And that's it. So now we can see it's scaling proportionally. We can see even all the way from desktop to tablet and even mobile, everything is scaling down proportionally. Now, let's add a background and let's make some final touches to this desktop design, and then we're going to go ahead and touch up on our our tablet and mobile. So very important about our header. We may want it to scroll with the page. When we're scrolling down, you see how it stays up. We want it to scroll down. So we can set it to positions pinned. When you set it to position pinned, you can see how it scrolls down with the page. And it also overlays the section. You can also set it to position sticky. And you can also set it up in that case to stay on the top of the page, but it won't overlay the section. Now, that's it. Now we have our section designed. I think I have one more component. Now, throughout the course of this webinar, we're going to be using something called the asset library. Asset library is a library of components, section designs, and all these other things, even your site styles for your site, that you can save onto a library and share with the rest of your team or reuse it across your own projects. So for example, here we have a lot of different components I saved before. It's mostly just to speed up the process. It's stuff that we're going to cover, so don't worry about it, but it's just to save some time here. So I click here to add this button, and you can see how it's saved here. And again, you can share it with your team or even collaborators if they're not directly a part of your team. You can share it with them as a link. Great. So now we have this into place. And there we go. Let's just take a look here at the tablet, and let's take a look here at our mobile. Now, something important about this button here is you can see the blue dotted line appears to come from the top. We can actually change this button to actually be coming from the bottom, to dock to the bottom. So that way it pushes from the bottom instead of pushing from the top, right? Because it's pushing from the top, we can see that when we get to our mobile design, it touches the edge of the section. So let's go ahead and change it a bit. We can go to docking here. You can see it's set up here, and we can actually just click on this to remove it. And now we can click on the bottom docking. Now, when we go to tablet and mobile, you can see how it's pushing from the bottom instead of pushing from the top. So it looks a bit better. And this is why docking sometimes can be helpful. So always use it as a means, as a tool, whenever you need it. But, you don't really need it all the time. Great. So now we have our desktop design. Let's talk about how designing on tablet and mobile works. On Wix Studio, anytime you design on tablet, anytime any type of design you have on desktop will cascade down on smaller breakpoints. So we have a cascading logic here for designing. Now, the same thing for tablet. If I make a change on tablet, it's going to only cascade down to my mobile. And actually, what we're doing is we're setting up overrides. We have our components set up here, designs, and we can override the specific properties. So for example, I have this image here. Maybe I want to move it down a bit on my tablet, so I can move it down. So now that I moved it down, we can take a look and see what happened to our desktop. Nothing, right? Because only the changes that we're making on tablet will cascade down. You can see on mobile, it did cascade down. You can see how it's not on the edges anymore. Now let's go ahead and make a few more changes. For this image, this video, I actually want to hide it. I can right click on it and select Don't Display. We don't want to delete it because if we delete it, it will be gone from all the screen sizes. But we do want it to not display on this specific design. And we'll see where we can find it again if we want to add it. So I can just move this button to the side. Maybe we want this to be a bit bigger. Just play around with it a bit there. Now, where did the other video go to? Well, you can still find it under Layers panel. We can see we have this eye with a slash over it. This basically just means that we've hidden it. Moving on, let's go to our mobile. You can see how maybe on mobile we might want to make some changes here. So actually for mobile, I think we need a bit of breathing room here for the section. Let's just make it a bit bigger. Also, the fonts probably need to be adjusted a bit. So let's just move everything around a bit. Again, this is very quick and simple to do, just as if you're designing on any type of design software. We're going to resize our fonts here. And let's resize here our header. There we go. Okay, Manilu. and maybe just make this, I think it needs a bit more breathing room. Here we go. And there. Perfect. So that's it. Now we have our design. And of course, we can change different properties like the font size here of this text. We have a lot of different options as far as what we can change here. Everything here in terms of the elements themselves, we can override any sort of design property for these elements and change them around. What we can't do, and this is important, is move an element to a different parent. This is just because breakpoints are actually only meant, you can see here that when we want to set it, it's telling us hold a command option to reparent on all breakpoints. Let's just do it just for demonstration purposes. What's going to happen here is I actually change the structure of my page. We can't change the container it lives between the different breakpoints, because then it is going to affect our upper breakpoint. This is just the logic of how breakpoints were designed in CSS. So, just keep this in mind when you're designing. So great. So now we have our first section fully built. And again, we haven't had to really do any math here. So let's go ahead and just work on our next section. I'm going to add a section below it because I like to always have one section below where I'm working. And now we're going to just add a color here. Let's make it black. There we go. And now we're going to go ahead and just add more components from our assets. Scroll down here. We have an icon we're going to add. And because we already did scaling, we're going to do a little bit of a different type of layout here. We're going to go ahead and add about here. And now we're missing one more thing, which is our paragraph. So let's add our paragraph. Great. Let's just resize it just a bit. Okay, perfect. Now, we're going to just resize it a bit here. Okay, perfect. So first of all, we're gonna start using a bit of some containers here in order to kind of keep things a bit more consistent. Now, this design here scales proportionally perfectly fine, but in this design, maybe we don't want the text to become so small. So we actually have a different type of scaling here. You can see if I was to change the scaling to the logic that we have now, I just set it to auto. When we go here, it could actually, I actually have it already enabled. When you add things from this is something very important. When you save something as an asset, it's actually going to save with all the properties. It seems like maybe I mistakenly saved it with properties of override. So something very important that you can do is if you want to connect an element again to the breakpoint, to the upper breakpoint, you can select here and select using all breakpoints. Now the design that I have here is going to apply to my smaller breakpoint. You can see how it doesn't look so great anymore, right? We have a few issues here. So let's go ahead and just add some structure here. So we're going to put our circle here, and this second, let's try to, yes. It's sometimes hard to click on it if you have it right above let's try to do something here. So let's try to, I'm actually just going to set arrange bring to back for a second, just to make it easier to edit this section, then we'll bring it back to front later. So we'll put this about here. Now, something very important about positioning in response to design is positioning is based off the distance away from the parent, right? We're talking about the top left of the parent here. But what about if I want to set a position of an element away from its sibling? For example, I want the position of these two to always be consistent in a specific logic. I can always select these two elements and select what we call stack. When we put it in a stack, for those of you familiar with CSS, we're putting it inside of a flexbox. But basically, it's just a container that creates a specific defined margin or distance away from the two elements. So for example, here, we can see here the item spacing between the two items is 30 pixels with an asterisk. I can always decrease it, let's just say 10. And you can see how it will automatically adjust. We can also set up the elements to be aligned to each other. And then we can go ahead and just click on here, click on this text, and select to stack as well. Now that these elements are stacked, we can go ahead and also just click on the margins here. You don't even need to use the inspector. And let's set up maybe 30 pixels with an asterisk. Perfect. Now, something I also wanted to do is keep a consistent distance away from the edges of the container. In order to do this, we can actually add two different things, right? We talked about how margins adds blank space or distance away from the edges. So here we have some distance, but maybe we want to add it around the container, inside the container actually. This is what we call padding. Padding is just padding. Imagine that you're working with a picture frame, right? The picture frame, the frame itself is the padding for the picture inside. So we want to add some padding here. And again, remember, percent takes a percent from the parent, that applies that as the value. So we're going to go ahead and just say maybe 8% from the parent on the top. And then we're going to go ahead and apply it to all sides. Perfect. Now, what are we going to do? Well, we're just going to resize this box. Let's just resize the box a bit. Actually, we need to resize the text, right? Because of the text itself needs to fit. Okay. There we go. And very important, you can see per element, you have different responsive properties. So let's go ahead. We have it almost there in the edges. Just go ahead and just put it there. And now for this text, we can, again, we want to just make it scale a bit down. And maybe we want to just have here, again, 30. Okay, there we go. So just put it right in the center. So that way now we have a more consistent distance away from the edges. Now when we go over to our breakpoints, you can see that the same design is applied on the smaller breakpoints. And again, we can increase the font size here. Let's just say right now it's at 24. Let's put 40 here. Another thing we could have done, instead of changing the font size directly, is we can also go to maximum minimum and set a minimum, right? We want to say this cannot be smaller than 50 pixels. I think it's going to be really big. Yes, it is. So let's go ahead and actually put 30. I think 30 will be okay. Perfect. So you kind of get the idea here that it's very easy to edit here. Now for this, for the container here, the stack here, I want to make sure the items are aligned. I saw that they weren't. And then I also want the circle, I want to fix it a bit. So let's go ahead and click on the element here. Just because it's a bit small, it's easier to edit this way. And actually, you can see it's set to advanced sizing. So I'm actually just going to switch it back to basic sizing here. And we can just modify here the width and just put 10 pixels. And again, our editing size here for the screen is 390. So it's a lot easier to set up in this case. So there we go. And maybe, oops, I think I didn't set up the alignment correctly here. So let's just set it up there. There we go. So now we have everything set up here on our 3 breakpoints. You can see that the spacing became smaller on the smaller breakpoints because, of course, there's less width on the screen. Here you can see how it gets thicker because we're using percent. Percent is a responsive unit. Perfect. Now we have the 2 sections set up. Let's go ahead and build one using one of the most powerful layout tools we have, which is our grids. I'm going to add a title here to the section. Let's see where it is. Here we go. Grid title. Perfect. So, and again, I'll add one more section because I like working with it this way. Now, a grid, very, in essence, a grid is basically rows and columns in a section. But in theory, what a grid does is it grabs an area and divides into separate areas. For example, here, I can grab this section and put 2 columns here. Now we have 2 separate areas. You have the left area and the right area, or right cell and left cell. I can continue modifying this division by adding more divisions here. So I can modify it here, split horizontally, and then split vertically. Now we have some sort of layout that represents what we saw earlier on the design. Now, important about this is each cell actually functions as its own container. So I can go ahead and just basically, go to add this 100% and add a background. do different things on this container, add its own divisions inside the cell as well. You can see when I click on the cell, I can even divide the cell itself. So you can have a grid inside of a grid. Now, the cool thing about this is you can multi-select different cells and swap them. You can play around with them. It's very easy also to resize them. If I want to resize them, I can just go like this, resize it however I want, whichever division we have, we can resize in whichever way is mostly useful. Now, I've already designed the cells themselves because it's things that we've already talked about, the font sizes, also with the paddings and different things like this. A very important responsive behavior that, oops, I accidentally clicked on this. A very important responsive behavior that you'll find for containers and other types of elements is called stretch. You can click on stretch and we'll stretch across the background of the parent container. So let's go ahead and add multiple cells here. Let's add all our cells. So add this one here. I can click again, stretch here. And there's actually a shortcut to stretch. Let's add this cell here. And the shortcut to stretch is actually this. Oops, I keep on clicking on the wrong thing. Just make sure you're clicking on the right things whenever you're moving stuff around. So let's go ahead and stretch it here. And now we can go ahead and add our last one, which is right about here. So great. Now we can go ahead and stretch this. And now it fits perfectly inside our grid. Now the shortcut for grid, I don't know if you caught it, for stretching is this icon right here. You can stretch. That way you can see responsive behavior behaves here. We disabled this inputs because of it's being stretched. There isn't really anything to control. You can always, after you've stretched, you can always add spacing around the stretch as well if you want to add like a bit of spacing with the docking and margins here. So, you can always add, let's just say 5% here or something like this, however you want to work with it. So great, now we have our design. Let's see, tablet looks okay. And when we start to get down to mobile, things are looking a bit tight. We need to make some adjustments here. Now, of course, we can always play around with this section, and change our layout. You can see we have different layouts. So we can set it to cards. We can set different types of layout options for here. Now, in general, we have a very useful tool to help you responsify your sections called Responsive AI. So as you guessed it, Responsive AI will actually look at your layout, look at your content, and try to build a better layout for you to make it more responsive on whatever breakpoint you're on. So for example, here we have generate mobile layout, but we can also generate for all breakpoints. Because we already have the desktop and tablet already set up, let's just do mobile. So it's going to start making some changes here. So, I think because we have the images inside, it's important to give some breathing room to these grid cells. So that's why it's adding this spacing here. So you can apply. Oh, I meant to click apply. So you can see that it's already set up my design here, and it's looking great. And even after it's already set up my design, even if there's like something maybe I wanted to change to make a small change into it, you can still make changes, right? We can go here to our gaps, for example. Gaps is just creates gaps between the cells, and I can set it back to 0. So great. Now, for some of you, you may be familiar with grids from CSS. We actually can turn this grid into a CSS grid as well and take advantage of all the different responsive unit and all the power that you have there. You can go here to advanced CSS grid on the layout options and click switch. Now, something important about this, once you switch to a CSS grid, you can't switch back to this behavior that we had earlier. It's going to have the same design when you switch to it. It's just that now you have access to all the tools, and it does involve a bit more, a configuration to set up your layouts, but you'll have more tools to work with. So you can click here and switch to CSS grid. And now you can see we have all the different unit types. We're not going to cover each one here, but there are other tutorials available in the Academy for you to review. that you can see all the different units for here. So the cool thing here is what we were doing before, we didn't have to set up all these different units, all these mathematical, fractions, equations, and all these different things. Everything was automatically set up for us, by default. So it really takes away the need to set up things with math. Now, let's go ahead and add our next section. We're going to add some designs here from Kate Manilu. Now, oops, I added it in the wrong place. I'm just going to roll it back because I want to make sure I'm adding this section in the right place. So let's add it one more time. Okay. Let's drag it into place. There we go. So great. Now here we have our design, and yes, it's using a CSS grid. You could have also built this using the super grid, which was a simpler format. Now, what we want to do here is we actually want to add some interactions. We want to make this, this is our project. We want to show it off. We want to catch people's attention. So we can actually create an interaction by going in the inspector and clicking interactions here. We have a lot of different interactions. Now, something important about interactions is there are no code interactions. So you don't really need to write any code. It's all configuration done through the panel here or on the stage itself. So we have interest interactions. Interest interactions are basically interactions that will happen once you scroll down to the component, but they only run once. You can see here it will reveal itself and it only runs once. It doesn't return again. Run again the animation. So we'll actually delete this one for a second. We also have hover interactions, we'll see in a second. We have click interactions, so when you click on something for some animation to happen. We also have scroll interactions and loop interactions. Now, we're going to add scroll for this one, and I'm going to click here, reveal. Once you select the interaction itself, you can always go to adjust animation, especially for scroll interactions. I really suggest doing adjust animation because you can preview without having to go to the site preview. You can preview the animation. And we have different options for different interactions. So here, I want this interaction to start from the right. So reveal itself from the right. And you can see here the difference between this one and the entrance is that depending on my scroll position, it will start or stop the animation and even roll it back as we scroll up again, right? Our animation area here represents how far down you need to scroll for the full animation to happen. So if I've only scroll down 17% of the image, it will actually already happen by the time we got here, right? This is about 17%. What about if we get to 80%, right? It's going to take a lot longer because you're going to have it right about there. So it's important to play around with this value. I will keep it at 50% because I think it's nice. By the time you get here, it's ready. It's showing you the whole image. Cool. So that was very easy to set up. Now we have our scroll interaction. Let's add our next section. We're going to add a section using what's called a repeater. Now, for those of you that aren't fully familiar with repeaters, repeaters are just basically a container that has multiple items that share the design but have a different content inside of them. So for example, here, they all share the same design. So if I make a change to the design, I change the size of this image, it will reflect across all the different items. Also, we can set up inside each individual, inside the repeater, we can also set the repeater themselves to different display types. Right now, they're displaying as cards. We can have a list layout, a slider layout, grid. We'll look at a slider when we get to mobile, but it's just something to keep in mind. We can also set an A/B design pattern. So this means that the first item has a specific design and the second item will have a different design, and so on. So you can see here A, B, A, B. So it'll give you the opportunity to have some sort of, a differentiation between the design of the different items. Great. So actually for this specific design, we actually want to connect it to data. So I've actually already uploaded some data beforehand. If we go here to our collection, I have a collection I've set up beforehand. If you're not super familiar with collections, just, basically it's a place where we can store data that can be connected to our site or can be used just for logic purposes, or just maybe if you want to store data, you can store data using this. For example, if someone submits a form, you can submit the form and store the data in this collection to review it later. Now, in this collection, we're going to use it to build out our design and add the content inside of the design. You can see we have a field for everything. It looks very similar to a spreadsheet, as you would assume. Now, what we need to do in order to connect this to the page after we've created the collection, we can go to Add Content Elements, and we need what's called a data set. A data set will connect data to the page. So you can click here, choose Collection, we can choose Latest Design, and then Create. Now we have our data set, it's already connected to our page. What we can do here, we can select how many maximum items to display, the filter is sorting. So with this out of the way, let's go ahead and connect our repeater. The repeater itself, we can go ahead and select which data set we want to connect to. This is the only one we have. Let's just say for the image, I can connect our data set here to the image. There we go. And you'll see in a moment, it will update itself. When we go back here, let's make sure it's connected to the right text. There we go. Let's just go back. It's easier to edit the connections here. You can, even when you hover over the element, it will highlight it for you. So you can always just do that. Let's go back to repeater connections. We'll skip the tags for now because I think, we're running a bit short on time, but we can also connect the tags and everything there as well. Now, if I go to preview, you'll see that you will see the data populate on the collection here, and then we can just go back to edit. And now we can go into this specific connection of the repeater. The data set itself, we want in the data set to have some sort of sorting. And I've actually already set up beforehand that we have an order number for each individual item. Can add the sorting here, and that's it. Now everything is sorted. Last thing for this design, we want to add some hover interactions. So what we can do is I want to hide these tags and show them on hover of the item. What we can do is we can go to design, we can scroll all the way down and go to adjust. Adjust are properties that we can change when a hover interaction happens. So we can go to this opacity option and go to 0. We want the opacity to be 0, so that way it's hidden. Now remember, we have the A/B design, so I need to remove the A/B design before it will happen on here because it only applies to the A design right now. So let's go back to our repeater and remove the A/B design pattern, select delete. You'll see it will apply on all the items. Okay, so now the tags are hidden by default. Now we're going to go to interaction here, and we're going to go ahead and click on hover. Now we have add here. We have a lot of presets we can do, right? We can do on hover grow, on hover twist, recolor, whatever. Now this specific interaction I want to create is actually a custom interaction. So I can go here to custom. I already have a few that are customly made, but I actually want to make it from scratch again. So let's go ahead and click on new custom. And it puts us in this interaction mode where we can modify our different containers. We can go here and set the opacity of this container back to 100%. And it adds it to our timing. We can modify when it starts, when it ends, and also the easing effects as well. We have a lot of different design options for here if you want to modify it as well. But that was basically it. Now that I'm done, you have the animation 4 connected to our element. When I go back to preview, we will see that the tags will appear. Now, important thing I talked about earlier about the different layout options. Very cool about the repeater. Right now it's being displayed on mobile. Let's just take a look at our mobile. It's displayed on mobile as cards, and because they don't fit side by side, we only have one item per row here. But we can go ahead and set it to slider. When we set to slider, as you would assume, you can actually slide to see all the projects. So it's a really cool option for mobile, and you can see it doesn't affect our tablet or our desktop when we change the layout. It's only per breakpoint. Great. Now we're going to add one more section before we get towards the end. And I believe I accidentally added a grid here. So let's go ahead and let's just delete this grid cell because I accidentally clicked there. And let's go ahead and add one more section here. We're going to go to our showcase. 1 second, show reel. Perfect. Now, what I want to do, I don't know if you remember, but we showed a video that was resizing based off the height of the screen. So what we need to do is make this section fit the height of the screen. So actually under responsive behavior, you can find fit to screen. And when we click on this, it will fit perfectly on the top and bottom of the screen. We can go ahead now and just add a video here. Let's add our video. Where's our video? Oh, it's in our media. I was relying a lot on our assets here. So let's go ahead and just add it to the page. And again, we can click stretch here and it will stretch across the background. You can see how it fits on the top and bottom of the screen. Now, if we want to add a bit of, breathing room around the edges, we can go ahead and go to the section. We can click on the section from here as well. And in the section itself, we can go ahead and just add some spacing. So let's put 8%. Some padding, right, is what we would call it in this case. And then we can add maybe some background color. Add some background color here. And that's it. So great. And again, every single responsive property does have its own advanced sizing options. So we can always look at them here. In this case, we're using what we call viewport height. If you're new to viewports, basically viewport is the area of the screen that displays your website. So typically it's the browser, right? The part of the browser that's displaying the website is what we call the viewport. So it's fitting 100% of it. And we can always continue editing the height, modify this and put whatever value we want. Even after we put fit to screen, we can even decrease it a bit because maybe we don't want it to be perfectly the height of the screen. But in this case, I think it's okay. Great. Last things last, we're going to add one more section, which is our contact section. In this contact section, we're going to add what's called a loop animation. I'm going to add our section here. And it's going to take a second here to add. Very important about this text. Now, something you can see is that the text is sort of getting cut off. But you can see if you look at the bounding box, it sort of goes over the page. What we call this in responsive design is overflow. The content is overflowing the container. So what's actually happening here is the page itself has a setting for overflow content that you can set it to show or hide the content. Now, why would we want it to hide and not show it? Well, if we set it to show, you will see it actually creates a horizontal scroll on our page. So by default, the page is set to overflow hide. You can see now we can see the text. When we cut it off, it will be cut off. Overflow can also be set up per section, per container. You can see here we have it set to show, but because the page is hidden, it's cutting off anyway. So we don't really need to set it up. What we're going to do here is we're going to add another interaction. This interaction is going to be a loop interaction. A very quick and easy one. We actually just want this to cross like a ticker. So you can see here when you go to preview, it will take a second here to load. You can see how it will continue to run across the page. So that's it for our interactions. And let's add our last section, and then we're going to take some questions. We're going to add actually another type of container. We're not going to go super in depth into this container. There are other resources that cover this container. But this container is called a layouter. The layouter, you can also add it by going here to add elements. In the quick add, you can find the layouter as well. But just remember the layouter has a few different layout types in comparison to grid. It can seem very similar to grid. One of the key differences between this and the grid is if I select this element, I can go ahead and go into advanced sizing for this element. It is a bit more advanced container. So, if you're new to this, I really recommend getting into it a bit later, but it's also okay to play around with it. And let's just say I want to make sure the minimum width is 450 pixels. For those of you that are new to minimum widths and maximum widths, it just basically, it's pretty straightforward. It's just, this is the minimum size I will allow this container to become. Because we're using responsive properties, or things are scaling or changing sizes based on the screen, you can set a limit on when it stops to shrink and when it stops to grow. Because sometimes, things get too big or too small. So because I set it to 450, take a look at our breakpoint here. We're not switching breakpoint, but the layout is switching. Now, I'm not doing a lot of configuration here. We can change it, of course. This item on the bottom is very big. But you kind of get the idea here that this layouter allows us to, for the content itself, to cause a change on the layout of the container. So it has a bit of a different logic than the grid, because the grid, you have a layout that works for throughout the entire breakpoint, whereas in the layouter, you can have the layout change per some sort of other rule, like minimum width. So great. Thank you guys for this, for letting me show you guys Wix Studio. Really, we saw a lot of great things with scaling. So I really think that you should take advantage of this and build some great designs. So let's go ahead and take some questions.
Thanks, Sebi. That was in-depth as always. We're now going to cover a few of the popular FAQs that come up in these sessions. So let's get straight into the first question. Do I need to save my website?
So great question about saving the site. The site by default is set to autosave. You can see here on the top, you can have the autosave here. So you don't really need to worry about autosave. We will automatically save. You can always go inside history and roll back any changes as well.
Thanks, Sebi. That's good to keep in mind. Can you explain again why we need containers?
Now, regarding containers, you don't always need containers, but there are some designs where you need to have, a bit more configuration, a bit more control over the elements. Containers really allow you to grab, just very similar to what we did with the grid. We could grab this, this text and this here, and say, let's put it inside of a stack, which is a type of container. We also have regular containers you can add. For example, if we go here to add panel, we can add this container from here. And a container is basically just allows you to create a separate, division inside of a container, of another container called a section, that really allows you to have a bit more control of what's happening inside of that container. You don't always need it. For example, in this design, we didn't use it at all. Everything sort of scales down proportionally. But in some designs, maybe you want a different behavior and you might need it in those cases.
That's important to remember. How do you decide on the breakpoint ranges?
How did we decide on the breakpoint ranges? So basically the breakpoint ranges, we actually use a lot of data based off usage, visiting different websites and everything. And we gathered a lot of data on screen sizes and device sizes and all these different things. So we set up, the most common screen sizes for these different breakpoints. You can always modify them by going here and modify them however you want. You don't need to. By default, we've set it up so it works perfectly on desktop, on mobile, and all these things. Sometimes you might even want to add a breakpoint. Maybe you want to design specifically for iPad Pro, or some other, maybe larger screen. There's these curved giant screens that maybe you might want to make more adjustments. And again, when you add a breakpoint, it follows the same logic as having 3 breakpoints, where the largest breakpoint will always, cascade down the design of the changes, and any changes you make will automatically be overridden from future design changes on the larger breakpoint.
Great, thanks. What if I need an extra breakpoint?
So as I mentioned earlier, you can add the breakpoints by going here. We have the option of adding a breakpoint, and we can add up to 6 here.
Wow, that's useful. What is the difference between margins and paddings?
So great question about the difference between margins and padding. So in this design, we're using primarily padding. But we also could add some margins to the elements above and below. We can just play around with the values to add it, but the margins themselves are margins added to the elements. So on the outside of the element, you can see here, this actually does have a bit of a margin. I didn't really catch it because I didn't check, but we can align it to center. You can see it's set to 0, but we can add, let's just say 20%. This will add 20% spacing outside the element, whereas padding is added on the inside of a container. So they're interchangeable. Many times they're used in the same cases. This is a cool thing about responsive designs. There's many ways to achieve the same exact design. In general, if you're new to it, you can just play around with margins and see what it looks like with padding, and you kind of will get the gist of what's the main differences.
That's really good to remember. And that pretty much covers it for our introductory demo. I hope you found this session helpful in giving you the knowledge base you need to start creating on Wix Studio. Remember, if you want to learn more about what we covered in this video, then check out Wix Studio Academy. Also, if you have any questions, then make sure to sign up to our community forum at forum.wixstudio.com. Until next time, see you soon and keep creating.